Imagine walking into a room and making one of fashion's most legendary photographers whisper, "Wow." Imagine being so magnetic that every designer demanded you in their show at just 17. A girl from Philadelphia didn't have to try light, seemed drawn to her. Her name was Gia Carangi, the first true supermodel in history. But only a few years later, that same world turned its back. The faces that once worshipped her disappeared. At 26, Gia lay alone in a silent hospital room. No cameras, no flowers, no friends. Once the brightest star in fashion's sky, now forgotten before the lights even dimmed. To understand how beauty's most perfect creation became fashion's first ghost, we must go back to where the light began. It was 1977. The word supermodel didn't even exist. Models were silent mannequins, expected to be beautiful, graceful, and invisible. Then came a 17-year-old girl from Northeast Philadelphia, Gia Carangi. Her father was an Italian-American sandwich shop owner. Her mother, an Irish-Welsh woman who left home when Gia was 11. Between them lay a little girl who learned to survive by pretending she didn't care. In her neighborhood, being different was dangerous. Gia was different in every way: tall, androgynous, magnetic, with eyes that didn't just look at you, but through you. She hung out with Bowie fans, painted her nails black, and wore men's shirts like armor. She loved women, not secretly, not shamefully. In a Catholic working-class world that punished difference, Gia dared to be honest. Her rebellion wasn't loud, it was luminous. She wanted to be seen, but not possessed. In the clubs of Philadelphia, under strobe lights and cigarette smoke, she moved like she belonged to no one. One night, a local photographer saw her, and everything changed. A few weeks later, drenched from a storm, Gia walked into the Wilhelmina Models Agency in New York. Wilhelmina Cooper, the legendary model turned mogul, took one look at her and said, "She's the one." No test shoot, no questions, just instinct. Within months, Gia's face began appearing everywhere. There was something electric about her. She wasn't posing, she was feeling. Every tilt of her head carried both seduction and defiance. Photographers loved her because they couldn't control her. Shed ruin perfect lighting by moving at the wrong time and somehow make it better. Her first major shoot was with Chris von Wangenheim in 1978. The image that would define her early career, Gia and makeup artist Sandy Linter, both naked, separated only by a chain-link fence. It wasn't just provocative, it was revolutionary. Two women, vulnerable yet powerful, looking directly into the lens. In a world built on male fantasy, Gia turned the gaze back on itself. That photograph made her a legend overnight. Suddenly, every designer, Armani, Dior, Versace, Yves Saint Laurent, wanted the girl with the haunted eyes. She wasn't just selling clothes, she was selling freedom. But fame for Gia was never just about beauty, it was about belonging. For a girl who grew up feeling abandoned, the flash of cameras felt like love. The fashion world became her family. And Wilhelmina, her surrogate mother, "You're not like the others," Wilhelmina told her. "You burn from the inside." And Gia did burn. She was unpredictable, raw, and alive in a way few models dared to be. While others smiled politely, she smoked between takes, swore like a rock star, and made editors wait if she wasn't ready. Yet no one dared to be angry, because Gia was the image of the decade. At photo shoots, she radiated contradictions, fierce and fragile, sensual and sad. She would burst into laughter, then fall silent, staring into the mirror as if seeing someone she didn't recognize. She looked at herself, one stylist recalled, as if she already knew the ending. By 19, Gia had graced the covers of Vogue Paris, Vogue America, Vogue Italia, and Cosmopolitan. She became the first model to cross from editorial art to commercial superstardom. When she walked into a room, silence followed. Not because she was famous, but because she made beauty feel dangerous. Yet behind that storm of success was a girl who still missed her mother. Gia called home often, left long voicemails that went unanswered. On set, shed sneak glances at mothers hugging their daughters and go quiet for the rest of the day. And then, in March 1980, everything shattered. Wilhelmina Cooper, the only person who truly believed in her, died suddenly of lung cancer. Gia was devastated. "It was like losing the only person who ever saw me," she said later. That loss marked the beginning of her descent, though no one noticed it yet. On the surface, Gia was still the hottest model in the world. She still closed the biggest shows, still graced every cover, but something behind her eyes had dimmed. At Studio 54, the legendary New York club where night never ended, Gia found what she thought was comfort cocaine, then heroin. The drugs dulled the ache, made the world quiet for a while. In the flashing lights of the club, surrounded by fame and noise, Gia disappeared, slowly, beautifully, tragically. In those first years, though, before the darkness took over, Gia Carangi redefined what it meant to be a model. She wasn't a product. She was a storm, untrained, uncontrollable, unforgettable. She had no idea that her own fire would one day be the thing that burned her alive by 1979. Gia Carangi was no longer just a model. She was a phenomenon. Her face was everywhere. Vogue, Cosmopolitan, Harper's Bazaar. Her body, angular and raw, moved differently from everyone else's, as if the runway were her natural habitat, as if she had been born to be watched. She didn't walk, she prowled. Photographers couldn't capture her, they had to chase her. At 19, she had everything the industry worshipped: youth, danger, beauty that couldn't be replicated. Armani called her a creature of instinct. Versace said, "She doesn't sell clothes, she sells a feeling." The camera loved her the way the sun loves the sea, enough to destroy her. Everywhere Gia went, silence followed. At shoots, assistants froze. Even seasoned editors whispered. When she entered the room, she wasn't the kind of beauty you admired, one photographer said. She was the kind that scared you. Behind the lens, her intensity was magnetic. "Move left," a director would say, but she was already there. She could shift emotion with a breath, go from innocence to defiance in a blink. She didn't pose, she inhabited. That was the difference between Gia and everyone else. Then came Sandy Linter, the makeup artist who would change everything. They met during the Chris von Wangenheim shoot, the same one that had catapulted Gia into stardom. Sandy was calm, delicate, the opposite of Gia's wildness. On set, their eyes met in the mirror. Gia smiled, and for a brief moment, the girl who never belonged found a home in someone else's gaze. Their relationship was passionate, impossible, doomed. Gia brought chaos, Sandy brought control. In public, they couldn't exist. In private, they were inseparable until they weren't. "She was too intense," Sandy said later. "Too much love, too much fear." Every night, Gia came home from the studio. The emptiness grew louder. The applause was intoxicating, but it faded too quickly. She started chasing something that could keep the high alive. It began at Studio 54, New York's temple of glamour and excess. Under the strobe lights, surrounded by glitter and cocaine, Gia was both adored and devoured. "Everyone wanted a piece of her," recalled one designer. And she kept giving pieces away. The drugs came easy, offered in whispers, hidden in compliments. At first, she laughed it off. Then she couldn't stop. Yet on the surface, she was untouchable. The industry built her into a myth, the girl who could sell a dream with a stare. She became the first model to command superstar fees $10,000 a day, sometimes more. Photographers like Richard Avedon and Francesco Scavullo competed for her time. Fashion houses reshaped campaigns around her name. In the photographs, she was invincible, a goddess draped in silk and danger. But off camera, Gia was unraveling. She would stay up for days, chain smoking, calling friends at 3 a.m. to ask if they still loved her. When they didn't answer, she'd whisper to the mirror, "It's fine. I don't need anyone." The more famous she became, the lonelier she was. Fame was a mirror that reflected everyone but herself. When asked in an interview what success felt like, Gia paused. "It feels temporary." That sense of impermanence haunted her. In 1980, she shot one of her most iconic covers, Vogue America, November issue. The image was flawless, Gia's smile radiant, her pose effortless. What no one knew was that her arms, hidden behind her back, were already marked by the first traces of addiction. The perfection the world celebrated was already cracking. Still, the offers kept coming. She walked for Versace, Yves Saint Laurent, Dior. She appeared in Calvin Klein campaigns that defined the decade. Her beauty had matured into something darker, more dangerous. She looked like someone who had seen the end of the world and come back just to tell the story when Wilhelmina Cooper, her mentor and protector, died in March 1980. Gia's fragile balance shattered. The woman who had believed in her from day one was gone. Gia didn't cry. She went back to work the next day, as if pretending could delay the grief. But grief has its own timeline. It caught up quickly. In the following months, Gia's behavior became erratic. She arrived late to shoots, disappeared mid-session, sometimes brought strangers into studios. Some called her unprofessional. Others called her cursed. But no one asked why the girl who once lit up every room was now burning herself down. She began a ritual of self-destruction disguised as glamour, showing up to work high, skipping sleep, vanishing into the night. Friends would find her hours later at 54, barefoot, dancing with ghosts. She looked like she was trying to disappear in slow motion, a fellow model said. Yet even as her control slipped, the world couldn't look away. The more Gia fell apart, the more mythic she became. Magazines whispered about her moods, stylists called her dangerous, photographers called her real. In an industry obsessed with surfaces, Gia's cracks made her human, and humanity, it turned out, was marketable. There's a haunting line that circulated around New York fashion circles at the time. Every generation has a face. Ours had Gia, and she couldn't survive it. By the end of 1980, Gia was both the face and the warning of her era. Her photographs sold millions in perfume and luxury campaigns, yet the woman behind them was drifting toward oblivion. During one interview, when asked what scared her most, she didn't hesitate. Losing myself. But maybe I already have. It was the kind of answer that should have stopped the world. But fashion never stops. Gia Carangi had conquered the industry and was already being replaced by it. By 1981, the photographs had stopped hiding what the mirror screamed, Gia's. Beauty was still there, the cheekbones, the gaze, the dangerous magnetism, but something behind her eyes had gone missing. She was arriving late to shoots, trembling, sometimes vanishing mid-session. What the world saw as rebellion was really withdrawal. Her heroin use had deepened. What began as a way to silence the noise became the only way to hear herself think. In the beginning, she still looked like Gia, radiant, defiant. But addiction moves quietly. It doesn't destroy you all at once. It erases you line by line. At Studio 54, she was no longer the girl everyone admired. She was the girl everyone avoided. The lights that once worshipped her now burned her skin. Dealers waited outside the club. Photographers pretended not to see. She was too wild, they said, too unpredictable. But no one asked what she was running from. She tried to quit. She tried more than once. She entered rehab under a fake name, left after 3 days. The cameras followed her even there, desperate to capture the fall of the world's most beautiful girl. They wanted me to die pretty, she would later say. By the end of that year, agencies stopped calling. Vogue refused to book her. Designers replaced her with safer versions of herself, clean, smiling, empty. Gia was out. One night, she called Sandy Linter. "I am scared," she whispered. Sandy didn't answer. She had already learned that loving Gia meant drowning with her. The spiral accelerated. Gia began showing up at shoots visibly high. Once, during a Versace campaign, she excused herself to the bathroom and never came back. They replaced her mid-shoot. The next day, her photo appeared in the tabloids under the headline, "Supermodel Gone Mad." By 1982, Gia had returned to Philadelphia, to her mother Kathleen. The apartment smelled of cigarettes and rain. She slept through days, wandered through nights. Her arms, once the subject of art, now bore the map of her addiction. Her mother begged her to go back to rehab. She agreed. For a while, it worked. She gained weight, smiled again, even tried modeling one more time, but the calls were short-lived, the jobs shorter. Nobody wanted to insure a liability. The girl who once sold dreams now reminded everyone of nightmares. She began to fade from the magazines, replaced by newer faces, Paulina Poroskova, Cindy Crawford, Christy Brinkley models who were called the new Gia. The irony was cruel. They didn't know that the original was still alive, just invisible. One last attempt came in 1983. Vogue agreed to test her again under strict conditions. Gia showed up sober, glowing with hope. For 3 hours, she was perfect. Then she excused herself to get some air and disappeared for 2 days. When she came back, she was pale, shaking, and silent. That was the end. From that moment, Gia Carangi ceased to exist in fashion. She drifted into the underground of Philadelphia friends, gone, money gone, reputation burned. She worked odd jobs, then none. There were rumors she was seen in the red light district, trading her body to feed the addiction. Nobody confirmed it. Nobody tried. In 1985, she was admitted to a hospital for pneumonia. The diagnosis came later, AIDS. Back then, it wasn't just an illness. It was a sentence, a scarlet letter. The tabloids called it the plague. To have it meant shame. To speak of it meant exile. She didn't tell anyone at first, not even her mother. "I didn't want to hear the pity," she said. ID had enough pity for one lifetime. The fashion world never mentioned her name again. No tribute, no statement, no farewell. The same magazines that had built her legend erased her existence. For an industry obsessed with youth and perfection, sickness didn't fit the narrative. Her body weakened. Her phone stopped ringing. Her photographs, once symbols of desire, began to look like relics of someone else's life. Nurses at the hospital didn't know she had once been the face of Vogue. To them, she was just Gia C., another young woman in a ward, filling too quickly. When her condition worsened, her mother stayed by her bed. Sometimes, Gia would ask about New York, the shoots, the lights, the people who'd once called her family. Kathleen didn't have the heart to tell her they'd all moved on. One night, Gia asked for a mirror. The nurse hesitated, then handed her a small one. Gia looked for a long time, not at her face, but through it. "I used to know this girl," she said softly. "She was really something." She passed away on November 18, 1986, at the age of 26. No photographers, no flowers, no crowd. Just a mother and a silence that felt like punishment. The funeral was small, almost secret. No designers sent condolences. No one from Vogue attended. The only headline came from a local paper. "Former model dies at 26. One line, one paragraph." That's how the world forgot its first supermodel. Years later, one nurse who had cared for her recalled she never talked about fame. But sometimes, when she slept, she smiled like she was still dreaming of cameras. The cruelty of her story wasn't just her death. It was the speed with which beauty became disposable. The same flashbulbs that had crowned her burned her alive. The same industry that fed on her radiance spat her out the moment she faltered. But even in her disappearance, Gia became a mirror. Every generation of models that came after her carried a fragment of her rebellion, the danger, the hunger, the refusal to fake softness. They all knew her name, even if they pretended not to. In the early 1990 seconds, a journalist named Stephen Fried began investigating her life. He spoke to friends, photographers, Sandy Linter. They all said the same thing. She was too much for her time. His book, Thing of Beauty, The Tragedy of Supermodel Gia, reignited the world's memory. Then came 1998. HBO released the film Gia, starring a young Angelina Jolie. The performance was electric, painful, and too real. Jolie won a Golden Globe. The world rediscovered Gia, but not as the woman she was, as the myth she had become. That, perhaps, was her final irony in death. She became what she never managed to be in life, safe to adore. Today, her name is stitched on the AIDS memorial quilt, a square among thousands, each representing a life taken too soon. Visitors walk past, whispering names. Most don't know that one of them once ruled the world with nothing but a stare. Gia's story isn't about fame or addiction. It's about what happens when the world loves you only for your reflection and you start mistaking it for yourself. She wanted to be seen. She was, and then she was gone. After her death, the silence was almost cruel. No obituaries, no tributes, no candlelight vigils. Fashion moved on fast, loud, and blind. But grief has a strange way of surviving, even in forgotten corners. In the years that followed, whispers of Gia began to resurface. Like a ghost refusing to vanish, she lingered in the memory of those who had once seen her burn. Photographer Francesco Scavullo kept one of her portraits in his studio until the day he died. "She wasn't a model," he said quietly once. "She was a storm caught on film." Others remembered her differently. The laugh that filled entire rooms, the way she'd light everyone's cigarette before lighting her own. They said she was trouble. They also said she was unforgettable. It wasn't until 1993 that her story returned to light. Journalist Stephen Fried published Thing of Beauty, The Tragedy of Supermodel Gia, the first attempt to tell her truth beyond gossip and myth. The book peeled back the glamour, revealing the girl behind the legend, frightened, tender, desperate to be loved. It shocked the fashion world. For the first time, people saw what fame had done to one of its own. 5 years later, HBO's film Gia aired. A young Angelina Jolie played her with unnerving intensity, raw, wild, devastatingly human. Jolie won a Golden Globe for the role, and Gia Carangi's name finally returned to the world's lips. But even that resurrection came wrapped in irony. The industry that had erased her now romanticized her tragedy. They celebrated her pain like it was fashion. Still, the story reached those who needed it. Girls who felt invisible, misfits who burned too brightly, women who had been broken by the world's obsession with perfection. To them, Gia became something she never had the chance to be in life. A warning, a reflection, a kind of saint. Her mother, Kathleen, later said, "Gia didn't die for nothing." People started to talk about addiction, about AIDS, about how cruel beauty can be. That's something. She visited Gia's grave often, bringing small bouquets of daisies, Gia's favorite. There were never many visitors, but there was always someone who left a flower, even decades later. In 1996, Gia's name was stitched into the AIDS memorial quilt, a patch of white cotton embroidered with her photograph. Thousands of names surrounded her: artists, lovers, strangers, all swallowed by the same silence. Visitors would stop, read the tag, and whisper, "Gia, wasn't she a model?" Yes. And more than that, she was a generation's lost mirror. Over time, her legacy began to change. Modern supermodels Cindy Crawford, Naomi Campbell, Kate Moss, all cited Gia as inspiration. They borrowed her energy, her defiance, her danger. Cindy once admitted, "They called me Baby Gia because I reminded them of her." But none of them truly carried her curse. They came after the lesson had been learned that beauty without protection becomes a weapon turned inward. Gia's story became a case study in every modeling agency, the girl too honest for survival. She didn't play politics, didn't obey rules, didn't pretend. She demanded love in a business built on illusion. And when illusion collapsed, no one caught her. In the end, what destroyed Gia wasn't heroin, or fame, or disease. It was the emptiness of a world that applauds until you fall, and then forgets you were ever standing. And yet, in the flicker of every flashbulb, in the wildness of every woman who refuses to conform, she still lives. Her face haunts mood boards, her story inspires documentaries, her name returns each decade like a ghost that refuses to die. If you look closely at her last photographs, there's something strange, a calm, as if she had finally stopped performing. As if she knew that, in a world obsessed with perfection, truth was the most radical act of all. Gia Carangi was never meant to survive her time. But she did something more enduring. She revealed it. Before Naomi, before Cindy, before Linda, there was Gia. She didn't invent beauty. She exposed its cost. She lived like a match struck in the dark, burning fast, leaving light behind for those who came after. The world remembers her face, the sharp jaw, the piercing eyes, but forgets the silence that followed each camera click. Gia Carangi was the first to show that beneath the perfection of fashion lies the fragility of being human. She was not destroyed by fame. She was destroyed by the emptiness that fame conceals. Her story isn't a tragedy of addiction or death. It's the story of a girl who wanted to be loved for who she was, not for what she looked like. And in that desire, she became eternal. Today, every model who dares to be authentic, every woman who refuses to smile when she doesn't want to, every soul who chooses truth over illusion, carries a piece of Gia's rebellion. She lost everything, her beauty, her fame, her life, but she gave the world something no photograph could capture, the courage to be real. Maybe that's what beauty truly is, not the face on the cover, but the freedom to step out of the frame and still be seen,